Good morning, Ma'am Florinda, and good morning, classmates. We are the Group 1 and we will talk about the social, environmental, and other life factors. First one is we will be having an overview of self-identity. So what is self? One of the most asked questions is, who are you? How can you answer this question? Let's find out. The self is a topic that is often talked about but largely goes unnoticed. Every time I is mentioned, like for example, I will go to school, I will take a bath, I will eat hamburger, the self is highlighted as the actor. You are the one who will be doing something. It's like you are the star of the show. On the other hand, me is usually used as an object, like give me the book, tell me about something, it makes me happy, and so on. Noticeably, the self composes both I as an actor and me as an object. The focus on the self is even more evident in the functional word variation of I and me used in everyday language depending on the purpose. The consciousness of the existence of the self has been almost automatic and reflexive. Everyone knows that they exist, of course. The knowledge of yourself existing in this world is automatic. The self is composed of four components. The first one is the self-concept. The self-concept is how you perceive your behavior, abilities, and unique characteristics. For example, beliefs such as I am a good friend, I am a kind person are part of an overall self-concept. The second one is the self-knowledge. Self-knowledge includes knowledge of your own character, values, abilities, and emotions. Example includes knowing that you are a smart or a good speaker. The third one is self-esteem. Self-esteem is your overall opinion of yourself. It's like you feel about your abilities and limitations. When you have healthy self-esteem, you feel good about yourself and see yourself deserve the respect of others. When you have low self-esteem, you put little value on your opinions and ideas. The last one is social self. Social self refers to how we perceive ourselves in relation to others. It involves relationship building, empathizing, and communicating. The importance of choice. People believe that they do not need to seriously weigh the pros and cons of these choices before deciding, that their identities provide the meaning-making anchor. They know who they are and who they are directs their choices. In that sense, choices large and small feel identity-based and identity congruent. Identities are the traits and characteristics, social relations, roles, and social group membership that defines who you are. Identities can be focused on the past, the present, or the future. The person feels obligated to try to become, or the person fears one may become. Identities are orienting. They provide a meaning-making lens and focus one's attention on some, but not other, of the immediate context. So, what is the significance of this self or identity? Researchers in self and identity have long held that the self is both a product of situation and a shaper of behavior in situations. A core self project is making sense of oneself, who one is, was, and may become, and thus the path one should take in the world. Self and identity theories assume that people are concerned with themselves, want to know who they are, and can use this self-awareness to make sense of the world, how they think and make sense of the self and others, the actions they take, their feelings and ability to control or regulate themselves are all predicted to be influenced by self and identity. But what might happen if we don't know who we really are? What is our role to the society, or we just can't accept ourselves? Let's watch this video. Rather than attempting to distinguish between the mental content me and the aspect of the mental capacity of thinking I, modern use of the term self includes all these elements. While theories converge on the notion that reflexive capacity is critical to having a self, theories diverge in how memory is considered in self of sustaining the self. On the other hand, the self can be considered primarily a memory structure such that the me aspect of self has existence outside of particular contexts and social structures. Cultural psychologists have focused attention on between society differences in the livelihood of focusing on the me versus the us aspect of the self. For example, Americans are described as more likely than East Asian to take a me perspective. In contrast, social identity researchers demonstrate that whether one takes a me or an us perspective is not fixed by culture but influenced by context. More situated approaches demonstrate empirically that small shifts in context influence whether anyone, American or East Asian, takes on me or us perspective. Taking on a me or an us perspective influences perception and mental procedures more generally, as we discussed in the section of self-concept. In addition to being able to take both a separated and a connected perspective on the self, people can also consider themselves from immersed or distal perspectives. People can consider that others might be observing about them, seeing themselves as it through the eyes of others. Observer memories. In observer memories, the actor takes the perspective of an observer, seeing oneself from the outside. This is not the case for field memories, which are from the original perspective of the actor. Switching perspective is consequential. Thus, thinking about the self from a more distal perspective focuses attention on one's broader goals and values. It also reduces emotional investment in the self, reducing both rumination about the past and perceived overlap between the self one is now and the self one will become. Self-concept. Self-concepts are cognitive structures that can include content, attitudes, or evaluate judgment and are used to make sense of the world, focus attention on one's goals, and protect one's sense of basic worth. Thus, if the self is an I that thinks and a me that is contact of those thoughts, one important part of this me content involves mental concepts or ideas of who one is, was, and will become. These mental concepts are the content of self-concept. While we focus on the structural aspect of self-concept, much of the literate focus on the content and evaluate judgment, asking what people describe when they describe themselves and how positive they evaluate themselves. This focus on content plus evaluate judgment is quite common in research on children and adolescents and typically involves close-ended rating scales in a series of domains. However, content can be studied separately from evaluative judgment, often with open-ended probes asking people to describe their current, ideal, and ought self concepts, or their desired and undesired possible selves. In the same way, some typically operationalize as self-esteem or self-efficacy, and there are distilled evaluation of the person's sense of worth and competence in the world. Identity. Use the term identity in ways synonymous with what others have termed self-concept. However, the term identity can also be conceptualized as a way of making sense of some aspect or part of self-concept. For example, one can have a religious identity that contains relevant content and goals, such as what to do, what to value, and how to behave. Social identities as defined by Tajfel year 1981 involves the knowledge that one is a member of a group, one's feeling about group membership, and knowledge of the group's rank or status compared to other groups. Identity theorists focus on how cross-situational stability of identity content emerges. From this perspective, identities are distinct part of self-concept. The internalized meanings and expectations associated with the position one holds in social networks and roles one's plays. Social identity and identity theories also study two kinds of identities, the role identities and the personal identities. Role identities reflects member in the particular roles that require another person to play a complementary role. Personal identities reflects traits or characteristics that may feel separate from one social and role identities or linked to someone or all of these identities. An advantage using the term identity rather than the self-concept in this regard is that it reserved the term self-concept for broader perspective, as we discussed previously. To understand more about identity, here's a video to watch.
Today we're talking about identity. That's kind of a big word, but identity just means who you are. Let me break it down for you. Maybe you're a guitar player, but that's not who you are. Maybe you're really funny. That's not who you are either. Maybe you're adopted, or you really like sports, or you wear glasses, or you're a brother, or a sister, or you like science, or you're an artist. Those things might all be a part of you, but they're not who you are. Because all those little things that are a part of you are just that, one part of you. They don't make you you. God does that. The only real identity you have, the thing that makes you who you are, is this. You're made by God and loved by God. You may feel like you're supposed to be a lot of things, but you only need to listen to God. Because He loves you, He's always with you, and He has a plan for you. Because you're His kid. We all are. So we can trust Him and follow Him wherever He wants to take us. And that, in a nutshell, is identity.
To sum it all up, self-concept, and identity can be considered as nested elements with aspect of the me forming self-concept and identities being part of self-concept. Yet scholars often use the term self and identity as if they were synonyms. Sometimes the terms are used in reference to the process of making sense of the world in terms of what matters to me, or the consequences of social context on a variety of beliefs and perceptions about the self, or simply refer to membership in social demographic categories such as gender or social class. Thus, the terms can and often are used to explain what might be the process underlying outcomes but differ dramatically in terms of what, if anything, is assessed or manipulated. That said, theories converge in assuming that the self-concept, and identity come from somewhere or are stored in memory. We term these three core notions about self and identity as mental construct, social product, and force for action. Self and identity are mental concepts. Self and identity theories converge in asserting that self and identity are mental constructs that is something represented in memory. This capacity develops early. When shown in their faces in a mirror, many children aged 18 months and nearly all children aged 24 months touch their foreheads to remove a smudge unobtrusively produced by smearing some paint on their foreheads. This response is interpreted to mean the children know what they look like and know a smile should not be on their foreheads. This image-based self-recognition is not limited to the face. At this age, toddlers also notice a sticker secretly placed on their legs. Self and identity are social products. Self and identity theories converge in grounding self and identity in social context. Contextual effects on the self may be distal parenting practices such as schooling, the culture, the time and place in which one lives, the experiences one has had early in life. A large body of research has examined this assumption. Results support that the social construction of self by showing that people do generally incorporate what they think others think of them, though self-views are typically more positive than others' views, because getting to endorse one's identities matters. People change their behavior to get others to view them as they view themselves. Self and identity are forces of action. A common theme among self and identity theories is that the self matters for behavior, yet demonstrating that how one thinks about oneself produces actions rather than simply being associated with it has proven difficult. A clear way to demonstrate that the self does influence behavior is to manipulate whether and how people think about themselves, and to show that this influences their subsequent behavior. To increase ecological validity, some experiments conduct field research on the effect of identity in context. One way to examine effects of context on behavior is by asking people to consider an identity either before or after they engage.
Moving along, we will now be talking about understanding the process. As demonstrated in the previous section, effectively demonstrating that the self influences action often involves manipulating which self-concept or identity comes to mind. Stability can be assumed to emerge from early plasticity, that is, social context may shape the self as it is developing, but once developed, the self may be difficult to change. This states that we must finalize our decisions in life because once it's too late, it may be difficult to change. Next one is experience stability. Considers Plato's analogy of ship whose owner mends and repairs it, replacing the planks as needed. Eventually, all the planks are replaced, like Plato's ship that keeps its owner above the water while getting him where he needs to go. Now, let's take this context into real life situation. Let's change Plato's concept of the boat and the man to life and work. Both represents the life of an individual while the work represents the man. Same as Plato's concept, the stability of a person's life and career are dependent to each other due to its inseparable aspect. If the man focuses morely on his work, the boat, which symbolizes his life, will eventually neglect the boat's status and can lead to possible permanent problems that can wreck the well-being of the boat, which represents the individual's life status. Next is the self as a stable essence. Even preschool children, ages 12, infer stability of traits in inanimate and biological categories from as little as 1. By age 10, children's areas willing as adults to use personality traits to predict behavioral consistency of individuals over time. Once established, the notion of essence feels intuitively obvious and other adults are quickly to infer the existence of enduring dispositions motivating people's behavior and to infer traits from their behavior. This means that this fundamental sense of self appears to be universal. However, whether people define their qualities with adjectives or action verbs, and whether they believe their traits to, up, to apply to certain situation or to all situation may differ between cultures. Next one on this slide is the self stable. Separate from people's perception, it seems reasonable to ask whether the self is mentally stable construct. One way to ask this question is whether a healthy or effective self is essentially stable and invariant across time and situation. After trying on various possibilities, adolescents and young adults are predicted to stake a claim to an identity that remains stable, although the identity is a context-dependent mental construct. Research in this tradition manipulates neither social context to test effects on identity nor identity to test effects on behavior. Is the is the self stable? You and me, every one of us must know if we are stable in terms of what we must be stable in terms mentally. Our mind must be productive in our everyday lives. And physically, we can do work while our body is exhausted. Being stable with these two aspects makes us essentially stable for our daily life. Next one is the self as a context sensitive. To the extent that the self is a tool for meaning making, maintaining a sense of worth, and regulating behavior, then an effective self should be sensitive to a new information and so be malleable and variant across a change in features of the external and internal environment. The appearance of stability in empirical studies may be deceptive. The meaning of this will be explained. With this, we must know that we must set ourselves context sensitive. In other words, we shall make our life a little private to other individuals. Not all stable individuals have an absolute effective self composition. Having a great effective self will provide us a more sensitive perspective throughout our all identity features, including our internal and external personality variant. If a person neglects these components, the balance in between meaning-making behavior to stability of individual responses would create confusion to the person's reaction time and more likely to its behavior. Next one is how strong is empirical support? A rich array of social science theories assumes that the self matters for life choices and behavior, but similarly robust body of evidence that this so has yet to be assembled. The theory evidence gap means that the date, self, and identity theories may or may not provide robust models of what self and identity do and how they function. With this slide makes us questions ourselves. How well do you know yourself? Given the question, you should very well know your identity. You must be aware of who you are. If you are able to answer these questions, then you have a strong empirical support with the knowledge of your identity. Social comparison and contrast. A large number of experiments randomly assigned people to a no comparison control, an upward comparison condition, or a downward comparison condition. Compared to no comparison participants, those in the upward comparison condition reported more negative self-evaluation, while those in the downward comparison conditions reported more positive ratings. To elaborate more of this, in this statement states that us individual often compare ourselves to another individual. By doing this, we often look down to ourselves because we are likely to compare what we can do on things that they can. As stated by Lockwood and Kunda, if people often compare themselves to others, then the result will always be more on the negative side of the spectrum. Next one is incorporating self to others. Rather than assume that people contrast themselves with others, a more appropriate question is under what circumstances are people likely to contrast themselves with others, and under what circumstances are they likely to include others in their self-judgment. Consider the social context of school. In many urban school districts, failure rates are so high that students are likely to be aware of many other students are doing poorly in school. By this, we can say that instead of asserting that individuals compare themselves to others, a better question to ask is under what conditions are people likely to compare themselves to others, and under what situations are they likely to include others in their self-judgment. Most people would likely to judge themselves by different reasons, including their environment, status, well-being, skill, and the people around them. For instance, failure rates have increased in many urban school systems. Learners are aware of other students who are failing. If individuals regularly compare themselves to others, the learners at this institution should have a lot of opportunity for downward social comparison, and as a result have a good self-perception. The incorporation of oneself to others have depicted to several situations that brings positive to negative self outcome to learners, and by this it concluded that the place we move around and the people around us is creating a big impact on how we give title and judgment to ourselves. To sum it all up, it has been suggested that the self and identity are both stable and situation responsive. Both forecasts have evidence to back them up. However, just giving evidence does not answer the issues about the method. We have just reviewed the evidence that people integrate others into their self-concept and identities at times, contrastively compare themselves to these others at other times, and appears to do neither at other times. As a result, the fundamental questions appear to be how circumstances impact self-concept and identity. To further understand this part of the topic, here is a short video clip for you.
Being authentic requires that you first be aware that you are a creative and conscious being, a created self. Awareness is observing. It's being able to objectively watch what's happening inside of you as if it was happening to someone else. It is the observer that is in each of us. We are all born aware. As we grow, our sense of self-awareness develops and allows us to observe at a deeper level what we think, what we feel, what we say, and what we do. Consciousness is a part of your awareness that eventually branches off as it becomes shaped by the sources of influence in our everyday lives. Parents, teachers, peers, and even society as a whole. It is how we normally experience ourselves and how we think we are perceived by the world around us. Being self-conscious, which is fueled by a fear of rejection, is when we make judgments about ourselves based on our own perceptions, as well as how we think we're being perceived by others. When we're being self-conscious, it's typically characterized by what we call our monkey mind, internal dialogue, or our negative self-talk. I'm not as smart as most people. I'm not good enough. I'm too fat. My nose is too big. I'm too this, I'm too that. I'm always, I never. Does any of this sound familiar? Have you ever told yourself something along those lines? Think about a situation that makes you nervous. Maybe it's giving a presentation. And if you hate giving presentations, have you ever listened to what you tell yourself before you gave one? Maybe something along the lines of, I'm not funny or witty. This is going to be a train wreck. What if someone asks a question I can't answer? You know, I'm going to look like a complete idiot if I screw this up. This is our self-critic talking. It repeats its message over and over, and it can often be meaner and harsher toward us than we've ever been towards anyone else. And once our self-critic has successfully convinced us that we are somehow subpar and less than worthwhile, we start to put measures into place to protect ourselves, to achieve, to gain approval, to seek applause, and to avoid rejection and painful situations. When we are consumed with protecting, defending, and managing how others perceive us, it gets in the way. We get in our own way of being aware and being who we really are. This keeps us from bringing our true self into relationships with others, and it keeps others from doing the same with us. The result is that nobody authentically shows up. Instead, we continue to run on autopilot and simply go through the motions. But really, who's in control? It's you. You are. You might think it's your self-critic, but it's you. And even though your self-critic will always be with you, you are the decider, and you get to control what you focus on. So by focusing on your awareness, on your observer, and watching yourself from a distance, you can make some observations. I'm being self-conscious right now. I'm feeling calm and happy. Or I'm experiencing anxiety and stress. And through these simple statements of observation, you are better equipped to choose to be your authentic self.
Okay, let's move forward to thinking is for doing. People think in order to act. How how one thinks is profoundly shaped by the option available or what is trying to do. Inclusion exclusion. People sometimes compare themselves to others and incorporate others into identity. People sometimes included and sometimes excluded others from their judgment. For example, the speaker may be boring or not, the audience may be following along or just nodding off. At her standards set by the focus of her attention, she will see success as likely for her and recall her past as being pretty successful as well. Information that informs the target results a mental process of assimilating the target to the information that comes to mind. Metacognitive experience. The feelings that emerges while thinking, people assume that feelings that ease or difficulty that arise the judgment context are informative for the judgment itself. Dual processing models. It has two systems. One is a reflexive system. It is always at work without intention or effort, also known as natural assessment. Second system may or may not be active. Behavior is elected as a consequence of a decision process. This decision process is often assumed to take on an expandency. Dual processing models. Dual processing models makes prediction for moment-to-moment processing of information, both reflexive and reflective processing may be occurring. Okay, so let's move forward to identity-based motivation. Identity-based motivation, it is when action feels congruent with one's identity. It implies that the behavior is important and meaningful when action feels out of place. The same difficulty suggests that engaging in this behavior is pointless. These perceptions have significant downstream effects on meaning, which helps to make behavior meaningful over time. Identity-based motivation has three based core concepts. Dynamic construction is what comes to mind depends on what has come to mind recently. Ulit-ulit. Okay, so let's move forward. Mhm, mhm. Okay, so let's move forward to identity-based motivation. Identity-based motivation, it is when action feels congruent with one's identity. It implies that the behavior is important and meaningful. When action feels out of place, the same difficulty suggests that engaging in this behavior is pointless. These perceptions have significant downstream effects on meaning, which helps to make behavior meaningful over time. Identity-based motivation has three base core concepts. Dynamic construction is what comes to mind depends on what has come to mind recently. Second, action and procedural readiness is what I'm doing now, whether I'm pursuing my goals or doing something else. Lastly, interpretation of ease and difficulty. People make up their metacognitive experiences of ease and difficulty when thinking about themselves, mentally simulating action or actually taking action. The second aspect of metacognitive experiences is the interpretation of experiences. Difficulty will depends on the question on experience of difficulty is used to answer detail as next. Dynamic construction. People are motivated to understand situations and act in ways that feel compatible with their identities. According to the identity-based motivation concept, however, because identities are dynamically generated, the challenges encountered when working on them are seen as such. Consider the concept of racial ethnic identity. On one side, identity content is linked to a broader social structure. For example, a conversation of adult Dino and the baby Dino. Adult Dino said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Baby Dino said, "Happy." Adult Dino replied, "Okay, so we need to work on lowering your expectations." In today's society, most adults ask their children what they want to be when they grow up. Because the future is farther away, we don't really need to get going. However, we did write another version that instead of using the word nearer and farther, due to the fact that substance is also a vision, we showed them two circles that either overlapped or did not lap. They informed them that one circle represents them now, and other circle represents them as adult. School relevant or not, whether we think about future being relevant right now or not, small features in the situation can create different ways about we think. Okay, so let's go forward to action and procedural readiness. Relevant action ways of thinking about the world. As part of the action readiness, one must be ready to act in order to achieve desired identity goals and avoid unwanted identities. As a result of procedural readiness, one is prepared to make sense of the world using the identity congruent mindset. It is the question of what I'm doing now, whether I'm pursuing my goals or doing something else. Lastly, interpretation of difficulty. This formulation of identity as including both context and interpretation of accompanying metacognitive process. Everything you know about yourself that's on your mind that shapes readiness to act and make sense of metacognitive experience of ease and difficulty while thinking. For example, when two people endorses more idea that difficulty means importance like no pain, no gain, keep going, things we thought one time that it's a good idea to think when it's difficult, like I might be wasting my time or should I shift something else. When the experience time is limited, they are more likely to endorse the idea that difficulty might mean a possibility contrast. Okay, to summarize all things up, the identity-based motivation model proposes that people are motivated to act in ways and make sense of the world using procedures congruent with their identities. Since identities are situated, which identities comes to mind and what they mean in context is a function of both chronic and situational cues. To sum all of our report up, here is the video we should watch.
If you have ever read Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, you probably remember the infamous caterpillar perched on his mushroom. The first thing he says to little Alice is, "Who are you?" Alice responds with, "Why, I hardly know, sir. I've changed so much since this morning, you see." Alice is experiencing a crisis of self-identity. Self-identity is defined in many ways and with many theories within psychology. However, it is most easily explained by understanding all the parts that can make up our self-identity. Take a moment to think about what you would say to someone when asked the question, "Who are you?" Although it sounds like a simple question, are you finding it hard to choose words to describe your personality? Self-identity is a very complex idea. So complex, in fact, that even those who actively work on understanding themselves and their self-identity still have great difficulty. Some aspects of self-identity can be identified and described by others. When thinking about how to define yourself, did you use the words that describe your job, hobbies, family ties, nationalities, religious beliefs, and group affiliations? But how about what you think? Your morals and values cannot truly be known by anybody else. Nobody else can hear your thoughts. These parts of self-identity can only be truly explained by you. Let's go back to Alice in Wonderland. How do you think she should have responded to the caterpillar? Alice could have stated many things, including her name, her age, her height and weight, and other physical descriptors. She could also say that she is a daughter, a sister, a student, a cat owner, and a book lover. All of those last descriptors involve relationships with other people. Since we all live in a world with many other people, the external world of our society plays a huge role in defining our self-identity. As humans, we all have a need to develop a personal identity that distinguishes us from others. Questions such as, "Who am I?" and "Why am I here?" or "What is my purpose in life?" are critical parts of understanding ourselves and defining our self-identity. Simply distinguishing ourselves from other people makes defining our identity a social comparison. Even the most simple of physical descriptors, such as our height and weight, can be evaluated socially. Are you tall or short? If you consider yourself tall, short, or even average, it is a comparison to other people in your social culture. Although weight is just a number, many people judge themselves based on other people's weight. In this example, society plays a huge role in defining what is acceptable through the media. In many historical cultures, weight was a sign of good health. Since food was scarce, weight was a sign of health, wealth, and therefore beauty. Those who were thin were easily identified as lower working class people, while the well-fed were likely rich and of high birth. In society today, food is easy to obtain. A higher weight is not valued the same way it was in ancient times. Today, television has a tendency to use only the thinnest women and the most fit men who are often professionals when it comes to looking good for the camera. How would you value your weight differently if you had no access to television and media? Most likely you would consider yourself far more acceptable without the skewed ideas from the media. Clearly, society plays an essential role in how we evaluate and define our self-identity. We cannot define our self-identity without the context of our society. Let's go back to Alice for an example. We can theorize that one of the difficulties Alice has in answering the caterpillar's question has to do with the Society of Wonderland. Alice is new to this land and has not established her place in this weird world. She has few friends and does not know the rules. Alice may have been a cat lover at home, but in Wonderland, cats are strange beasts. At home, she may consider herself a lover of croquet, possibly even a fan of the sport. In Wonderland, she finds that she is not much of a fan of the sport at all, since they use flamingos for mallets and hedgehogs for balls. Alice has lost her sense of self-identity, not just her personal, internal self-identity, but also her social identity. As psychologists continually refine their theories of the self, sociologists also continue to refine social identity theory. Social identity theory explains that we can define ourselves by the social categories that we feel we belong to, such as nationalities, religious or political associations, gender roles, families, and even as niche as a group of fans of a certain sports team.
That's all for today. Good day, Ma'am Florinda. Good day, everyone.